Okay, so today, what we're doing, I'm Ryan, this is Rajesh, and we're talking through. So, Rajesh, you have this is the first round interview or the screening interview at Google, correct?
Yeah,
Perfect.
correct.
We're going to talk through some strategies for how to approach that interview, how you can think about things like resume and introducing yourself, as well as then some of the common questions that are going to be asked and strategies for approaching that. So, yeah. Anything else, Rajesh, to introduce before we kind of jump into the questions?
So yeah, myself, I'm Rajesh. I just moved from the United States. So I just started looking out and I applied to Google through referral. And I got a positive note from Google that they'll be interviewing me. My first round is on Friday. So myself and Ryan are going through some stuff like how to approach screening interview, and because that is really important, because once you've done, then you can go and meet the real Google team. So that is the first ball you need to play, so as to go and get the second ball, an opportunity to get the second ball. So thanks, Ryan, for accepting my request and taking your time to record that. We will do it. Hopefully, I clear that, and you have your first recording maybe may go really good. So thank you so much for accepting the request.
Yep, for sure, for sure. Well, and yeah, excited to talk to you. It's a big deal to get what you've gotten, so I think that's exciting. The other thing, in terms of my background, I've been through the Google process. I got an offer from the YouTube team before I founded the company I'm in today, so I'm familiar with their process. And remind all of us what role are you interviewing for with Google specifically?
It is for a search solution consultant. It is with something around something to do with the language. So it is not really purely technical. It's not purely management. I've already shared my JD also, so we can actually go through my resume and the JD also. Like if you can correlate both, and the questions to like what kind of questions like you can get, and you can also explain the strategy to answer that question as well. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. I will share. I'll share those so that people can see that. So let's actually start. I think the first question that you had that I think is a good question is, yeah, how do you walk through your resume and job description? What should you expect given this job description? So if you want to first pull up, let me share my screen. Let's first share. First, I'm just sharing the job description. And if you can pull that up, we can kind of read through this. For the job description, so a couple of things to note with a job description. One, they typically have minimum requirements and then preferred requirements. And it's good for you to be aware of those, especially for a screening call of what are those, and are you missing, one, is there anything missing from minimum requirements? And are you ready to answer a question of, okay, I don't have this, but here's how I have some experience that could be relevant. And then same thing with preferred qualities. If there's any of those that you have, you really want to lean into that. So I'm curious, as you look at this one, Rajesh, are there any of the minimum qualifications that you don't have? Or do you feel pretty good about that?
I feel really pretty good about that. I have every minimum qualifications that is listed. What I do not have is like I figured something I do not have from the preferred qualification is like I haven't dealt with a vendor, so that's something I haven't really done, and I haven't really proposed improve operations and execution of things. So that is the two things that I haven't really done
Gotcha.
from the.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so one thing because of that, I would think about with the vendor specifically, is there any experience you have where you've interacted with a vendor, used a vendor's product, reach out to a vendor to think, because they're going to say, oh, have you managed teams of vendors? And you'll say, yeah, maybe not in the way that other people have, but here's what I have done. So now you're redirecting the answer to, yeah, but I have managed things that are similar to that, because with all of this, you want to portray confidence and show the recruiter, I've thought this through and I'm ready to answer questions and talk about what I can do. So I imagine there's some experience you can draw from for that vendor, and I'd encourage you to think about that, maybe even write it down so you're ready to talk about that if they say, where did you do vendor management? So you can talk about that. And then in terms of preferred qualifications, I think we'll look at your resume in a second, but yeah, I think you have a lot of things that could fit into different parts of these qualifications. And I think that would be a great thing to lead into and really highlight then and make sure you talk about some of those, because the recruiter is always going to give you a chance. They'll say, cool, is there anything else I should know about you? And that's a great chance to say, I noticed in the job description you listed preferred qualifications as this and this, and actually if you haven't spoken about it, you'd want to call attention to it on your resume. So that's a really great place to go. The other thing in terms of job description, it says about the job and responsibilities. About the job is critical to make sure you understand enough about it, or if you have questions, I would even write those questions down to come to an interview. When I've interviewed product managers or people for technical roles, you always want to see that someone's read it through and thought about what they know about this or what they don't. You're not expected to know everything. I mean, obviously this is a very specialized position for Google with the search language specialist, not a common position at a lot of companies. And so it's okay for you to have questions and to say, yeah, I understand parts of this, but I wondered about this part or that part. You could also ask about the team. Are really great places to ask questions and say, this doesn't talk about how big the team is. It says that you work with people in all different countries and over 25 languages, but how many people are on the team and who would I be working with? Those are fine questions to be asking as well. And then in terms of responsibilities, same thing, where if there's anything that you're particularly good at, you want to make sure you talk about that and highlight, it said, for instance, the top responsibility, you'd work closely to build effective relationships with the core engineering, product, program management team. I think your experience as an engineer, you're going to lean way into that and say, yep, that's my bread and butter. I've been doing this for a long time. That sounds really good. Similarly to the qualifications, if there's any responsibilities you're a little less sure of or you're not obvious in your resume, you'd want to call that out and talk about it and have some answer to how you could handle that.
Sure. That makes sense. Yes.
Any questions about the job description and anything else you'd want to think of about the first screening interview with the job description?
I think we are really good on that on the job description. So it is really helpful that how did you a strategy to tackle this, like what I missed from the job description and what I've done something relevant, so that the recruiter is convinced to take me to the next round. I take this key takeaways from this first question actually. So we are really good on this on the job description part.
Cool. Let's go to your resume. And one thing I'll say about the job description and the resume is there's another set of tactics to use to just get in the door and get a screening interview. We're not talking about those today because obviously you've gotten the interviews. But the resume especially, the main job of the resume is to get you an interview. Once you've gotten an interview, then you just want to be ready to walk through your resume. My suggestion, there's a couple things that I'll suggest. One, a small detail, but can be really helpful. Whenever someone asks for a resume, I would send it as a PDF. So like the reason is like the resume I opened it. I have a Mac and I don't have Word on this one. I just have paper. I have Pages, and it bumped down, so now it's 2 pages instead of 1 page. But if you do a PDF, then it always stays exactly how you want it to look. So small thing, but
yeah, because the reason we share the document is because the ATS thing. We were advised to do the application tracking system because it doesn't really work with the PDF. So that's the primary reason I had to send it as a document. So I just So I just want to make sure I'm that.
Yeah, all good. Because sometimes they'll require it, and just for that, because they're like, we need to, pull that out. But if you're ever emailing with the recruiter or someone else, it's just a good thing to remember. If you're giving it to a human, send it if possible as a PDF. Or sometimes applicant tracking systems will let you upload a doc and a PDF to say, look, here's the printable version. Here's the one for the software. I really like a few things. One, your education. Typically, there are a couple ways to think about education. You either want to put it at the top or the bottom. At the top is when you really want to highlight it, and it's one of the biggest qualifications you have. The fact that you just got your MBA, you did this data science on campus program, I think that's perfect. You want to talk about that. Those are really good experiences to talk about. So I think this is great to highlight at the top. And the relevant skills, I think the way to use relevant skills is when you want to highlight the skills that you have. And especially with Google, this looks like a position that's sitting in between multiple technical teams. This is great that you highlight that you know Django and Angular, that you can do web development, and all these skills are going to help people go, like, okay, this is really helpful. That said, I don't always recommend people do that. But I think for you, the way you've done it, I think it works really, really well. Your professional experience. Here's here's what I'll just say in terms of the screening interview. We could talk about, again, getting the interview. One of my main tips that I share with people is focus on the outcomes you achieved, not just the responsibility you had, or what you did. It's not about what you did. It's about what did I accomplish or what did I impact. And then you say, like, I increased revenue by 10%. And then you say what you did. So that's something that can be helpful. But for you in this, my biggest suggestion is you're going to want to practice a 30-second to 1-minute walkthrough of your resume. The pitfall is typically people take too long to describe their resume, and they go on for a long time. Whenever you're answering questions, you ideally want to keep them shorter, say, no more than 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And you can always say, would you like more detail, or would you like me to tell you about an additional piece, and give it back to them. You want the conversation to be kind of a ping pong back and forth of I say a little bit and then you say a little bit and then we go back and forth. So I would practice a quick walkthrough. And that can be maybe, you have your program manager of CSUEB portfolios is one, and then you were at Hexaware Technologies for a long time. And so given that, you could say something like, well, hey, more recently I worked as a program manager and I had a good experience. That was for the past 8 months, that I did that. And previous to that, I was at Hexaware as in program management and software engineering for 7 years, where I had a number of responsibilities. So now you're kind of giving a high level overview. Then you can touch on a couple more details, and then you can say, would you like me to? I can go into more depth if you'd like. And then they'll be able to say, oh, no, that's okay. Or they'll say, oh, actually, I really wondered about, you said this on your resume. Tell me more about that. So summarization is powerful. And the summarization lets you control what you want to highlight about this. So any question or comment on that idea of kind of that 30-second walkthrough to 1 minute?
Sure. So you said me like you need 30 seconds to 1 minute walkthrough. Is that okay that I ask the recruiter like if I can do it a detailed walkthrough? Should I want to put that question about like should I want to give a quick walkthrough or a detailed walkthrough? Should I pose this question to the recruiter?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a fine question to post. Again, part of that's reading, and sometimes the recruiter will even tell you, hey, I'd love to hear a little bit about you, and then I have some questions for you. And you say, great. And you could say, cool, I'll give you maybe a 1 minute walkthrough. Is that okay? And they'll say, yeah, that would be great. You can give the walkthrough and say, cool, if you like more detail. Or you can also, I think the way you pose it is just fine to say, cool, would you like a high-level walkthrough? Or I could go through in detail if that's going to be helpful. This idea of being helpful and just saying, I'll tell you whatever you need to know, I think is powerful. But the thing that I've seen people do in interviews that you want to avoid is someone goes on for 7 minutes, 10 minutes and talks, and you don't want to do that. You want to give pauses and let the recruiter guide where the interview needs to go. You want to make sure that they're kind of in charge of it in terms of pacing and telling you, that's enough, or, oh, I'd actually like more detail there. So
sounds good. Yeah.
Any questions about your resume and how to walk through that?
Yeah, so I have a question. Like, during screen calls, will I expect like any technical questions during screen call? Because I had a technical question in screen call. I was very surprised. Because I was interviewed twice for Google, and when I was there were no tech experience. Like they just wanted to know my background and everything. In my second interview with Google, I was surprised that there was a technical question. Suddenly, there was a technical question. So how do I ensure that if I get a surprise question like this?
Cool.
Yeah.
So surprise question is a good that can be tricky. So sorry, what?
The question was during walkthrough. Once I did my walkthrough, she just asked, "How do you manage the risk? Like, how did you manage schedule change and everything?" It was very surprised for like surprise technical question for a screening round. So I was a little surprised. So how do I ensure that I'm surprised and to show like to like answer really.
Yeah, that makes sense, and yeah, it can be tricky when you get surprise questions, especially in the screening round. What I found, so Google, especially more than most other companies, cares a lot about the technical expertise of everyone touching their technical products. So especially if you're interviewing for a software engineering position or a technical program manager, but even I was interviewing for a general program or product manager leadership position, and when I got to further rounds, I had a specific technical interview where we went through in detail for about an hour on algorithms and data structures and a lot of things I hadn't done since my college days doing computer science. Here's my advice on technical questions. If you get them, one, expect that in the technical or in screening interview, you could get a surprise question. So, if they say, well, tell me how did you handle that? Like, what about the technical aspects of this? And going into detail, I think, one, remember who you're talking to. If this person is an engineer or was an engineer, they're going to want a maybe different answer than somebody who's not an engineer. So with the recruiter, it's always helpful if you know their name beforehand. And a lot of times they'll schedule an interview with you. You'll see their name. I would look them up on LinkedIn and say, who are you? What team do you support? So that you know when you're answering how much detail to go in and how to handle that question. The other thing is it's okay in interviews to pause for a second. You can, if you're asked a surprise question, sometimes people feel like, okay, I just got to start talking, and they say a lot of filler things at first. You can say, well, okay, that's an interesting question. Let me think for just a second the best way to answer that. And then you can leave some silence. That's okay. And I think a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. That comes with practice, to be able to take the time you need. Or even just to pause for even 5 seconds to say, yeah, let me see. I want to answer this in the best way for you. And then you pause and wait a second. It's also okay to share the relevant pieces. Again, similar to the resume walkthrough, to share a high-level piece to say, well, here's how I thought about approaching that. Or, yeah, it's been a while since I did that. Let me remember, okay, we had this piece and this piece. You can answer something and then say, yeah, does that answer the question, or would you like me to go into more detail? I love that type of approach, because if they're missing something, then you can make sure to follow up, and they'll say, well, okay, I was expecting this, and you say, oh, great, I'm happy to go into more detail. So it's good to make sure, again, you're ping-ponging back and forth, you're answering something and checking in with them. Hey, is that answer sufficient? Do you like that? So that's a couple of things that I would suggest.
Sure. It's a really nice advice actually.
Cool.
So yeah, I think I'm fine with the resume walkthrough and the surprise question.
Cool.
So during the walkthrough, should I want to do? Should I want to inform the recruiter that I'll be doing something outside of my work? So you can see like from my resume, I'm a host. I'm a professional host. I'm a public speaker. I'm a quiz master and everything. So should I want to really highlight that? Because in any interviews, I was never really asked about my work out of my, apart from my work, what I really do. So I even thought of like, should I want to remove that section, because that doesn't really add to my interview. So I was like little skeptical to put that for my work through everything. So what do you really suggest about that? Because it is a 1 minute walkthrough. And like having like 10 seconds putting on that does that really make sense on that?
I'm a big fan of that. So, but me personally, I like more informal resumes. I think people want to hire real people. That said, depending on the culture of both the company, the country, there's different cultures in different countries. So you have to know what's appropriate for you. But for me, when I've hired product managers, engineers, it's great when someone, don't go off forever about your personal stuff. But I think to be able to highlight and say something like, well, let me, here's my 1 minute walkthrough. Here's my educational experience, some of my technical experience, where I'm going to highlight key things that relate to the job description. And then you can say, it's not on my resume, but I also like this and this I've spoken many times, and these are the things that are important to me. I think for me, again, the key is keeping it concise. I would practice, and I said 30 seconds to 1 minute. I'd even go up to 90 seconds. This, for me, this question is going to be asked, which is, cool, tell me about yourself, or introduce yourself, or walk me through your resume. So there's no excuse for anyone not to practice this. So my advice is practice this a lot. Practice it 20 times today, right? It doesn't take that long to practice. And even if you want to record yourself on your phone, you record yourself and then watch it. You're going to learn a ton just by that. Or if you have a friend or family member around, tap on them and say, hey, could I walk you through this? Because this sets the tone for the whole interview, and it's something that you're given the floor to do, and you should be able to handle really well. So I think it's a key question, and it's one you should practice a lot. And yeah, my advice is keep it short, and then say, would you like, let me know if there's anything else you'd like to know about. Happy to go into more detail. And that lets them say, oh, I am interested in this. Like, tell me more about this. Or they say, no, that's great. That sounds awesome.
Sure, sure. It sounds really good. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is a really good point to add. Yeah.
Good.
So
Good.
how about we move to the next question? Yeah.
Sure. And yeah, your next question. So we've talked about how to do a proper self intro, what to highlight, what not to highlight. I guess we haven't talked about what not to highlight, but make sure you're not highlighting things that are not relevant to the experience that they're looking for. And this, it's also when certain different jobs you can talk about differently, right? You did a lot of things, I'm sure, at Hexaware for the 7 years you worked there. You want to highlight things that are more in line with this job. And if something's not as relevant, then, don't go into as much detail, or even skip it altogether. And if they ask about it, you can talk about it. Your other question is, how do you close your self-introduction? We've talked about my favorite question, which is, that's it. You can say, if there's anything you'd like me to go into more detail about, I'm happy to describe more. I think for me, that's a great way to end it. And I found a lot of success in doing that. Your last question was, how do you bring confidence into the interviews? There's two things that I suggest. One is make sure you have a quiet place with good, ideally headphones, that you're using. You have good reception, and anything you can do to take away the awkwardness of technology is going to be helpful. So I highly suggest that. The other thing is, if you practice, especially the beginning, it helps set the tone for the interview. And if you're ever caught off guard, take a breath. And tell them, give me if it's okay, I'm going to take a second to think so I can give you a good answer, and take a breath and think about it. It's easy to feel frantic of like, oh no, I don't know the answer to that question, and start talking. But taking a breath can help you just come across more competent. Even if the answer you say, well, I know this and this, and yeah, actually I'm not sure on the answer of that. I'd have to think about it more. The tone you give can make it so that even answers that aren't great can reflect well on you.
Sure. So, I really noticed an interesting response. Like, is that okay? I take a time. So, will that create a good impression? Like, because this we are doing it in a virtual environment. So will that make a good impression about asking for a time? Like, I just need a time. Is that okay? I take it, because the interviewer will say yes, because he'll not say no. But will that create a negative impression on that? So, what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, number one, if you don't have to take time, that's ideal. But if you have to choose between answering a question really poorly or taking 10 seconds to answer, I'd rather someone take 10 seconds to answer. For me, when I'm interviewing, if it also shows someone is poised and they're thoughtful and can think. The other thing is, you don't always even have to say, I'd like some time to think about that. When I did my technical interview with Google, it was very technical, like a lot of deep algorithm. And so I'd even say, they would even say, hey, if you need a few minutes to think about this, that's fine. Like, they'd wait while you're thinking things through, and they'd say, cool, describe out loud what you're thinking about. But you can buy yourself a little time by even saying things like, yeah, that's a great question. And where you say, that's a great question. And you take a second, and you say, well, to answer that, well, there's two things that I'd like to talk about. And so you're teeing the question up, you're letting yourself breathe a little bit, so you don't even have to use the words, I'd like a few seconds to think about that. But for me, that response is, if you're like, I don't know, don't just jump headlong into starting to say things that you're like, I don't know, I haven't thought about this, but pause, take a breath. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is really very good advice. I like yeah. So I was about to ask like if at all like is that okay? I have another request. Like, should I have access to my pen and paper during interviews? I actually I forgot to list that question. So sorry about that. So I really
No,
had this
that's
question.
okay. I'm a big fan of pen and paper during interviews, or sometimes I'll even have a blank document up on my computer. If you do that, you want to make sure you have no other distraction because you don't want to be distracted when you're talking. But it's helpful it's helpful at times to write down or type the questions they're asking, or even sometimes they'll give you answers if you ask questions like, well, could you tell me a little bit more about this team? How many people are on it? How long has it been a team? You could jot some answers down. And that's another thing. I think there's an interesting thing about pen and paper. It makes you seem smarter. It just makes you appear smart if you say, I'm taking some notes. Like if you ever want to have somebody give you great advice, you want to show them, like I've got one here on my desk. I'd say, if you start answering me, Rajesh, and tell me like, let me tell you how to think about doing this. If I say, well, I'm going to take some notes, one, it gives you, the recruiter knows, I might be writing some things down. Two, it shows that you're thoughtful and careful with information. I mean, I think for me, it's a wonderful impression to give. And even at the beginning, as the recruiter talks, you could say, I'm just going to take some notes here while you're talking to make sure I remember everything you're saying. Again, that's you're showing yourself as a very competent person by doing that. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah, sure. So I'll definitely do this time.
Cool.
Yeah, we are really good. So we'll go for the next question. So how do you
Sure.
answer? Yeah. This is
Yeah.
something really, yeah,
Yeah. So I
regarding
love
company questions.
Yeah, the company question. So now I think you gathered some good questions here. As I look through them, I'm like, yep, I was asked about all these questions, which are really great. So I'll read these questions, kind of all of them at once, and then we can go through them one at a time. But the questions are, so what Google product do you love, or what Google product do you like using the most? What Google product do you not like, and why? What would you improve about one of our products? Why do you want to work at Google? Where do you want to see, or where do you see yourself in 5 years, or what are your future goals? Where do you want to be? Tell me about a time you had to disagree with your boss. Tell me about a time when you had to say no to your boss. Those are great and can be really tricky questions. You said what kind of estimation questions do you prefer? I would say a question commonly asked, especially on product roles, is how do you prioritize? Like when there's things, how do you figure out what the most important thing to do is and why? If you're more on the technical side and Scrum Master, it can be, well, how do you estimate stories? How do you think about which story to take? As you get more on the product side, it's more on the strategic. How do you talk to stakeholders about prioritization? So we can talk about that. Yeah, you said any advertising question you suggest is, as Google loves advertising, so you should know. We'll talk about that, but asking about the main business of, well, hey, do you have any questions about how we make money our advertising business? And then we'll talk about other possible questions from the job description. Yeah, so okay, we can step through these and I can give some brief ideas of how to answer each of these if that's helpful.
Yeah, sure. You'll go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what Google product do you like? Which one do you not like? And how do we improve that? I think any company you interview at, do some research about what are their products. Think about what products, especially with a big consumer tech company, what products do they have that you use every day? It's helpful even if to have it, up on your phone, because if somebody asks, oh, what app? And you can say, oh yeah, actually on my phone right now I have, for Google, I look and it's like, oh, I have Google Chrome on my phone. I have Gmail on my phone. I have Google Search. I have Google Hangouts. And you can even talk about those again. And as you say things like, yeah, I looked on my phone. I actually have all these apps. Here's the one I use the most. And here's why I like it. I think it's helpful to think that through because, again, you can know that these types of questions are going to be asked and you can be prepared to answer them. On what Google product would you like to improve? I think this is a great, especially because you're going into a product-oriented role. It's a great one to think about beforehand to say, okay, well, which product would I improve and why, or what are multiple products that improve? Because they may also ask like, something like, cool, how would you improve? They may even take your the product you say you love. Like, oh, you said you love Gmail. You use it every day. How would you improve it? What would you like about it? And so then you can say, well, okay, here are a couple things that I'd improve about it. In product-oriented roles as well, my biggest piece of advice when you're talking about products you like, products you don't like, what you'd improve, is to think about problems to solve. Not just, well, I don't like how this looks. I think it should be this way, but you can say things like, well, I was thinking about how you monetize Gmail, and I know Superhuman is another app that's gone really well. I wonder if Gmail could have some of the Superhuman features and get a paid version like that. That'd be interesting to me. Or, well, when I was using it, here's a problem that I face all the time. And so I was thinking, man, if Google better did this, I think that could be really valuable to the consumer base. So you're now showing that you're thinking like a product person. So that can be really helpful. Any questions or reactions as we describe the product questions? What do you love? Which product do you like? What do you not like? What do you want to improve?
So do you really have any structure to answer this kind of questions? Like, so how do I structure my questions? I mean, how do I structure my answers? I cannot simply say that I love Gmail, and this is the thing. Like, I need to just need a feature to that add. So what structure do you suggest so that it really makes a good impression on you, that you don't really blank on this question also?
Yeah, good question. The structure I like to use is stories. So I like to say, and again, this is a question where you can pause a little bit. You can say, that's a great question. Let's see, I use a few Google products. I think the one I like the most is Gmail. And for me, and you start to, small stories are really powerful, because I would say, yeah, I got a Gmail account pretty early on. I think it was 2006. I've been using Gmail for 15 years. And what I love about Gmail, I really liked that they introduced the priority mail feature. I love that it separates my social and promotions compared to priority, because it helps me save time and I just don't have to think about it. And I really appreciate that. Again, now you're telling a story about you versus just saying, well, Gmail's used a lot or Google search is used a lot. Tell them why it matters to you and what feature you like that they've done. Same thing with the one you don't like, where you'd say, yeah, which Google product do I not like? Well, I really struggle with Google Images. And here's why. Because, yeah, the quality is never quite what I want. I find other searches more helpful than that. And I think there are a lot of ways that Google Images could be improved on how they show images. So again, it relates it to why you think it's that product. And partly because you don't want to say, well, this is the worst product because ... One, you don't want to accuse them. It's their products. You want to be kind to their products. But it's also your own experience where you say, yeah, for me, this is a difficult thing. And I think there's an opportunity for Google to improve in this, or I would find it useful if they improve this. So stories can be helpful. And again, like other things we've talked about, keep them very short.
Sure. So if there are something like, if there are like sample follow-up questions, so should I wanna like follow up with a story, or like just answer it directly? So what do you suggest about that? So if I say that I like Google Maps, and I say that Google Maps as a default voice, I wish that voice can be replaced with the person I love. It can be from my family person. It can be someone from my family, or it can be anything. Like if I can record my voice, my parents' voice, and if I use it in Google Map, so it will be really good. So that I start using it very often. So if there is a follow-up questions like that, so should I want to use a story, or like a story like I said is fine? So what do you
What you said is fine. The story can even be, you said a story in there where you said, I use Google Maps. My family uses Google Maps. Like it makes it really easy. That just makes it personal, that it's now super personal of like, well, why is this my favorite app? And so a story doesn't have to be a long, like, there was this one time that you just say, let me tell you why I like that. That's very different than saying Google Maps because it's the biggest map in the world. Like that has absolutely nothing about why you like it. I will say, as you bring that up, another thing that I like, I've seen be successful in my own interviews, and I like as other people, is the thoughtfulness. Sometimes the favorite product and the product to improve are the same things, where you say, yeah, I love Google Maps, but man, I'm really confused at why Google Maps and Wise ways are different products, because Google owns both of them, and I think together, man, they could really make a great product because they both have features that are powerful, and I wish that they would combine, and I think it's a good opportunity to monetize. Again, with all of this, my suggestion is practice a few times thinking about, well, what would I say and why would I say that? Because you know that these questions are very likely to come up. So be prepared with a few apps that you're ready to talk about.
Sure, sure, sure. Sure. That makes a really good sense. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I think we ran out of questions. I think so. So what I've like how what kind of questions like you think that is most frequently asked, especially in Google, so that we can discuss that strategy and maybe we can close the call. So we are also nearing our scheduled time.
Sure, sure. Why do you want to work at Google? This obviously comes up everywhere. Google has a very strong culture, and so I think it's a question to prepare to answer, to think about why do you want to work there. And I would, encourage you not to answer like, well, you pay really well, or well, you're a big company, but to say, what do you admire? What do you admire about what they've done? What products do you really like? What excites you about the future? What values do you like that the company has? I think those are all good things that I'd encourage you to practice and maybe even write down to say, yeah, these are a few of the reasons that I think I'd really like to work here. It can also be helpful if you have friends who have worked there, or you know people, or have even followed other product managers or people who have blogs from Google, to say like, yeah, I've interacted and I've seen some of the people who work there, and I just really love that, and I'd love to be a part of that team. Again, that's very different than just saying, well, I'd make lots of money, or well, Google's the best company and I'm the best, so I want to work there. You're saying, you want to say over and over again, like, I'm like you, I want to be like you, and I think it could be a really good match. Same thing when you say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I think there are a lot of potential answers to this question. You want to think about an answer that is true for you, but also that aligns with the company, where you say, if you, for instance, said, oh, in 5 years, I want to be in finance and doing this thing, the recruiter would be like, well, why are you working in this organization? Like, you want to have a 5-year picture that shows how this next step, this next role plays into that and can be helpful. Again, that's a question that I would just plan on answering, and I think will likely be asked in some way, shape, or form of, what's the future look like for you, or why this role now? So that can be helpful. Let's see.
I have a question here, Ryan.
Sure.
So if I stress more about the role than the company, so will that really make a good impression? So, because like Google is very tough to get, and working in Google is also it is something like kind of the prestigious thing. But the thing is that if I say that the role is really important than the company, so if I stress my answer to that, so will that make a good impression? Like, how do you say?
Yeah, I think there's a balance to take with that. For me, the suggestion I have is, I think it's important. It's hard to tell what the recruiter is going to be looking for, if they're more looking for Google fit or if they're looking more for team fit of like this specific role. That said, I think you have to meet a minimum bar of saying, I know who Google is, I want to be there, I'm the type of person who could be there. But I do think showing up and being specific about the role can be really helpful. And so I'd encourage you to maybe lean a little bit more into that. That said, it depends, and you kind of have to read the questions the recruiter asks. But ideally, you want the recruiter walking away saying, they would fit here. They answered, they seem like they would fit both with the company and would be good with this role. I'd love to pass them on because they seem like they match what we're looking for. That's what you want them to say. And so you want to get that minimum match threshold. So you do need to be prepared to say, how do I fit with the company? How do I fit with this role? And kind of see, maybe they may ask a lot of questions about the company, and you'll go more into that. Or I think more likely they'll probably ask more questions about the role if they're a recruiter that's specific to this, or this department. But that's a good question.
Sure. Yeah. So oh yeah. I think we have
the
a
other
question like take me. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, the other question. So you have the disagree with your boss. I'd encourage you to think about the answer to that. That's a good question to just think about in practice. Have some story that's not that's not like, oh, I swore at my boss and I left the company because they were so, don't tell that story. Tell a story of like when something happened and you're like, we didn't see eye to eye and here's how I resolved it, right? You want to talk about the situation that existed, what task there was to do, the action you took, and then the result of what happened. And same thing with the prioritization question where, how do you prioritize? You can talk about past experiences where you've prioritized or estimated or done things that are going to be relevant to this role. The advertising question, I think, is key because companies like to, if you're interviewing with Google, they're going to ask potentially about advertising. Do you know our business? Are you aware of what we do in the marketplace? Are you aware of how big we are? Where we get our revenue from? Same thing, if you're interviewing with Amazon, they're going to talk about, some of the history. You should know that they started as a bookseller, and now that they're e-commerce, and where most of their revenue comes from, and that they have different verticals of cloud computing and and other businesses that they've started. You should be aware of those enough. And again, I think just doing even half an hour of research and reading some articles, looking at some company about pages, and thinking about things like, how does this company make their money? How did this company start? What products do they have? That can just be really helpful to show up competent. There's nothing worse than being in an interview and I've interviewed people who really have no idea what the business is about, and it's like, you could have just done a little bit of homework to show that you knew about us and were prepared. So I would do at least a little bit of homework there.
Sure.
I think that's that covers a lot of these questions here. Again, the initial screen, the thing is, the recruiter is just thinking, will I look silly if I pass you on? Like, that's all they're thinking. They don't want to look stupid and pass someone on to the teams to interview that isn't going to be a good match with the job, that's not going to be a good fit for the company, or that seems incoherent and can't answer questions and have a good discussion. From everything we've talked about today, it seems like you're in a really good position to do well in this interview, so I'm excited to hear how it goes.
Sure. Thanks so much, Ryan, for taking your time. So it was really nice, talking for really an hour, about the questions I really wanted to know, and that too from someone who has already cleared and I got an offer with Google. So thank you so much, Ryan. I'm really grateful for taking you, for you that you just took your time to help me out this.
Yeah.
So I hope your endeavor with your company goes really well, and with whatever the mission you have taken, that also goes really well. So I really wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Cool.
So I really wish to meet you for subsequent rounds. About how to approach that, because this we just started pitching out. So we'll do our regular mock next round. So I request you to consider that as well.
Yeah, sounds good. Appreciate you being willing to record it. Hopefully this is helpful to other people who kind of come in your shoe in behind you and interview with Google or even other companies. Hopefully these tips are helpful. And let me know how the interview with Google goes. It's tomorrow, right? Is your interview? Or on Friday?
It is on Friday. It's on Friday.
On Friday.
Yeah, it's
cool.
on Friday.
Yeah, let me know how it goes.
Yeah.
Let me know how it goes, and happy to jump on and do other recorded conversations. Because, cool position you're in, and hopefully we can continue to talk and share the knowledge as you go through about how do you get a job, how do you get through these rounds of interviews, and how do you show up confidently. Because I think it can be a little scary to interview with such a big, well-known company, but it doesn't have to be. So.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
So thanks so much, Ryan. So take care. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye.
Yeah. Fine. Thank you.